I used to believe marriages ended suddenly. A confession, a found text message, a lipstick stain that couldn't be explained away. But mine unraveled slowly, in bank statements and missed dinners, in cologne I didn't recognize and phone calls taken in another room. I'm Emma Wilson. For 10 years, I was the devoted wife of a financial genius, the woman who sacrificed her career so Daniel could shine. He thought I was too trusting to notice, too naive to question, too loyal to fight back. He was right. Until he wasn't. The day I hired a private investigator was the day my husband sealed his fate. While Daniel planned his grand escape with his 20-something mistress and our stolen money, I was quietly dismantling everything he'd built. He didn't realize that the woman he'd underestimated for a decade was about to become his worst nightmare. Daniel thought he could disappear and leave me with nothing. Instead, I made sure he lost everything, while I found myself. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. I still remember the day I met Daniel, his bright blue eyes catching mine across a crowded university library. I was struggling with my economics textbook, and he offered to help. 10 years later, I found myself staring at those same blue eyes while he lied straight to my face. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Emma Wilson, and for years, I believed I was living a fairy tale. Daniel and I married right after graduation. While our friends were still figuring out their careers, we had a plan. He would pursue his MBA, and I would support us. I took a job I didn't love, but paid well enough to cover our bills while he studied. I believed in him, in us, in the future. We'd build together, and build we did. After Daniel graduated, his career skyrocketed. He joined a prestigious financial firm, and within a few years, he was made partner. We moved from our tiny apartment to a beautiful colonial house in the suburbs, complete with the white picket fence I'd always dreamed of. We hosted dinner parties where our friends would marvel at our success, our happiness, our perfect marriage. You, too, are couple goals, they'd say, raising their glasses of expensive wine that Daniel insisted on buying. How do you make it look so easy? I'd laugh and say something about communication and trust, while Daniel's arm would wrap around my waist, pulling me close. He'd kiss my temple and tell everyone that marrying me was the smartest investment he'd ever made. For years, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He brought me flowers every Friday, remembered every anniversary, and always called when he was running late. We were partners in every sense of the word, or so I thought. The first sign was so small that I dismissed it entirely. Daniel started working later, coming home after I'd already gone to bed. At first, it was once a week, then twice, then it became the norm rather than the exception. The Anderson account is massive, Em, he'd explain, loosening his tie as he slipped into bed at midnight. If we land it, we could take that trip to Italy you've always wanted. I nodded, half asleep, and didn't question why his shirt smelled like perfume I didn't wear. Then came the phone. Daniel had always been careless with his phone, leaving it on the counter while he showered, forgetting it in his jacket pocket. But suddenly, it never left his side. He'd take calls in another room, his voice dropping to a whisper. The screen would light up with notifications that he'd quickly dismiss if I glanced over. Work stuff, he'd say with a tight smile. Nothing interesting. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. After all, Daniel loved me. Hadn't he proved that time and again? Hadn't we built this life together? Then came the bracelet. I was looking for our passports in Daniel's office when I found the receipt tucked inside a folder. A white gold diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany's, $8,500 plus tax. My birthday wasn't for months, and our anniversary had just passed without him mentioning any surprise gifts. That night over dinner, I asked him about it. A bracelet? From Tiffany's? Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. A flash of something, panic, crossed his face before he recovered. Oh, that. It's for my sister. Her 40th birthday is coming up. That's generous, I said carefully. His sister's birthday was in November, 8 months away. Daniel shrugged. She's been having a rough time with the divorce. Thought she could use something special. I nodded, pushing my food around my plate. His sister Rebecca had never mentioned divorce plans to me, and we spoke at least twice a month. But I didn't press the issue. A week later, I was paying bills when I noticed something odd on our credit card statement. Charges for a dinner at Le Cirque on a night Daniel told me he was having a business meeting at the office. A charge for the Waldorf Astoria hotel bar. 3 cash withdrawals of $500 each in a single week. Daniel, I called from the kitchen, statement in hand. Can you explain these charges? He appeared in the doorway, his expression annoyed. What charges? I pointed them out, watching his face. The dinner was with clients. I told you I was meeting them that night. You said you were working late at the office. No, I definitely told you I was taking the Anderson team out. You must have forgotten. He ran a hand through his dark hair, exasperation in his voice. The hotel bar was for drinks after, and the cash withdrawals. I needed cash for the charity golf tournament. Remember? The one for children's cancer? I didn't remember any charity golf tournament, but Daniel looked so certain that I began to doubt myself. Had he mentioned these things and I'd forgotten? Was I so wrapped up in my own world that I wasn't paying attention to my husband's life? I'm sorry, I said finally. I guess I didn't hear you. He softened, coming over to kiss the top of my head. You've been stressed about your mom's health. It's understandable. I leaned into his touch, ignoring the voice in my head that whispered he was using my mother's recent diagnosis to manipulate me. The changes in Daniel became more pronounced as weeks passed. He started buying new clothes, designer suits that cost more than our first car. He joined an exclusive gym and began working out 5 days a week. His formerly lean frame developed muscles I'd never seen before. And the cologne, Daniel had worn the same cologne since college, a woody scent I'd given him for his birthday. But now he smelled different, something sharper and more expensive. Just trying something new, he said when I mentioned it. Don't. You like it? I did. But it wasn't Daniel. At least not the Daniel I'd known for a decade. Then came the lipstick. I was doing laundry when I found it, a bright red smear on the collar of his white shirt. My hands trembled as I held it up to the light. I didn't own red lipstick. I'd always preferred more natural shades. When Daniel came home, I showed him the shirt without a word. He laughed, actually laughed, and shook his head. Jesus, Em. Paranoid much? That's probably from Janet. You know how she is, always air-kissing. Everyone at the office. Janet was his 60-year-old secretary who wore coral pink lipstick, not scarlet red. But Daniel's dismissal was so casual, so confident, that I second-guessed myself again. Was I becoming the stereotypical suspicious wife? Seeing affairs where there were none? The final confirmation came from an unexpected source. We were hosting a dinner party for Daniel's colleagues when his business partner, Mark, had one too many whiskeys. As I was clearing plates, I overheard him talking to Daniel in the corner of the living room. Man, those trips to the cabin must be good stress relief, Mark slurred, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. You seem much more relaxed these days. Daniel's face tightened. Shut up, Mark. You're drunk. What? I'm just saying, a man needs his space sometimes. No harm in that. I disappeared into the kitchen before they could see me. What cabin? Daniel and I didn't own a cabin. We'd talked about buying one someday, but it was a distant dream, not a reality. That night, after everyone had left and Daniel was snoring softly beside me, I made a decision. I was done ignoring the signs, done gaslighting myself into believing his excuses. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how painful. The next morning, I called a private investigator. His name was Robert Taylor, a former police detective with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "I think my husband is having an affair," I said, the words strange and bitter on my tongue. Robert didn't judge or pity me. He simply nodded and asked for details: Daniel's schedule, photos, known associates. I gave him everything I had, including access to track Daniel's phone through our shared account. "Most spouses are right about these things," Robert told me as our meeting ended. "Trust your instincts, Mrs. Wilson." For the first time in months, someone was validating my concerns instead of dismissing them. It felt both terrifying and freeing. 3 days later, Robert called. "I have something you should see," he said quietly. "Can you meet me?" We met at a quiet coffee shop across town. Robert handed me a manila envelope without ceremony. "Take your time," he said, then walked away to give me privacy. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Daniel entering a luxury apartment building. Daniel at a restaurant, leaning across the table to hold the hand of a woman I'd never seen before. Daniel kissing her in a parked car. And the most damning of all, Daniel and this woman entering a hotel, his hand possessively on the small of her back. The woman was beautiful, probably in her late 20s. Long dark hair, olive skin, a body that belonged on a magazine cover. She wore the red lipstick that had marked Daniel's shirt, and on her wrist, the diamond tennis bracelet that was supposedly for his sister. I stared at the photos until they blurred through my tears. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of supporting him, loving him, believing in our future. And all the while, he'd been building a life with someone else. Robert returned, sliding a tissue across the table. "Her name is Sophia Reynolds," he said gently. "She works at Daniel's firm in the marketing department. They've been seeing each other for at least 6 months, possibly longer. 6 months. Half a year of lies." I took a deep breath, wiping away my tears. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Robert looked at me thoughtfully. "That depends on what you want, Mrs. Wilson. Do you want to confront him? Try to save your marriage? Or what? Or do you want to protect yourself first?" I thought about Daniel's recent secretive behavior, not just with his phone, but with our finances. The unexplained withdrawals, his insistence on handling all our investments, the way he'd been dismissive when I asked about our retirement accounts. "Protect myself," I said finally. "I need to know what else he's hiding before I confront him." Robert nodded approvingly. "Smart move. People who cheat often hide other things too. Let me do some deeper digging into your financial situation." As I drove home, clutching the envelope of photos, I realized something unexpected. Beneath the heartbreak and betrayal, a new emotion was emerging. Anger. Not the hot, impulsive kind that makes you scream and throw things, but something colder and more dangerous. The kind of anger that makes you think, plan, and wait. Daniel had betrayed me in every possible way. He'd made me doubt my own memory, my own perceptions. He'd stolen my trust along with my dignity. And now, I was going to make him pay. I sat at our kitchen table until dawn, staring at the photos scattered before me. Each image told a story, not just of Daniel's betrayal, but of his carelessness. He hadn't even tried that hard to hide it. In one photo, they were dining at Luciano's, the same restaurant where he'd proposed to me. Did he think I was too stupid to notice? Or did he simply not care enough to cover his tracks? As the first light of morning streamed through the blinds, I gathered the photos and tucked them into a hiding spot behind my grandmother's recipe book, the one place I knew Daniel would never look. Then I showered, dressed, and applied my makeup as if it were any other day. When Daniel came down for breakfast, I handed him his coffee with a smile. "You're up early," he commented, accepting the mug with a yawn. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I lied, matching his casualness. "You have the Taylor meeting today, right?" He nodded, looking surprised that I remembered. Yeah, at 10. Should be quick, though. I leaned against the counter, watching him over the rim of my own mug. This man, this stranger sitting at my table checking his phone, for messages from her, no doubt, had once been my entire world. Now I saw him clearly for what he was: a liar, a cheat, a man who'd built his happiness on my pain. I thought I'd do some shopping today, I said, keeping my voice light. Maybe grab lunch with Jessica. Daniel barely looked up. Sounds good. Don't wait up tonight. We're finalizing the Anderson deal, so I'll be late. The Anderson deal again? I couldn't help the slight edge that crept into my voice. He finally met my gaze, his expression carefully blank. It's a big account, Em. You know how important it is. I nodded, swallowing the bitter laugh that threatened to escape. The Anderson deal had been finalizing for 3 months now. It was his favorite excuse for late nights, his perfect cover for evenings spent with Sophia. Of course. Good luck, I said, turning away before he could see the hatred in my eyes. After he left, I called Jessica, my best friend since college, and the only person I trusted completely right now. I need a favor, I said without preamble. Can you meet me? An hour later, we sat in her car outside Daniel's office building. Are you sure about this? Jessica asked, concern etched on her face. You could just confront him. I shook my head. Not yet. I need to know everything first. At 5:30, Daniel emerged from the building, but instead of heading to the parking garage where his car was, he walked 2 blocks and hailed a cab. We followed at a safe distance, Jessica's old Honda Anonymous, in the sea of New York traffic. The cab stopped outside an upscale apartment building in Manhattan. Daniel paid the driver and entered, nodding at the doorman like someone who visited frequently. That's her building, I whispered, my nails digging into my palms. Sophia's. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. You don't have to watch this, Em. But I did. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to burn away any lingering doubts or hopes. At 6:15, they emerged together. Sophia was striking in person, tall and graceful, wearing a form-fitting dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Daniel's hand rested possessively on her lower back as he guided her to another waiting cab. I slid down in my seat, though there was little chance they'd spot us in the evening rush. As the cab pulled away, I straightened up. Follow them, I instructed Jessica, my voice hollow. They went to Le Bernardin, a restaurant Daniel had once told me was too pretentious when I suggested it for our anniversary. Jessica parked across the street and we sat in silence, watching the entrance. I should take you home, Jessica said after a while. This isn't healthy, Em. One more thing, I replied, pulling out my phone. I need to hear his voice when he lies to me. I dialed Daniel's number, putting it on speaker. Hey, Em, he answered, ambient noise in the background suggesting he'd stepped away from the table. Everything okay? Just checking when you'll be home, I said, amazed at how normal I sounded. I made lasagna. There was a slight pause. Ah, damn, I'm still at the office. Anderson is being difficult about the terms. I probably won't be home. Until late. Don't wait up. Working hard in the restaurant, are you? I almost said, but caught myself. Okay. Don't work too hard. I won't. Love you. The words, once so precious, now felt like acid. Love you too, I replied automatically. Then ended the call. Jessica stared at me, her expression a mix of sympathy and horror. What a bastard, she whispered. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. Let's go. I've seen enough. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Over the next few hours, I systematically went through our shared accounts. Credit card. Statements, bank records, investment portfolios, all the financial details I'd trusted Daniel to manage because he was better with money. What I found made my blood run cold. large withdrawals, $5,000, $10,000 at a time, from our joint savings. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Credit card charges for jewelry, weekend getaways, designer clothing, none of which had been gifts for me. He wasn't just having an affair. He was subsidizing an entire lifestyle for Sophia with our shared money. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. This went beyond betrayal into something more sinister. Daniel wasn't just cheating on me emotionally and physically. He was stealing. From me. The next day, I followed a hunch and visited our safety deposit box at the bank. Inside, among our passports and important documents, I found loan papers I'd never seen before. My signature was on them, a decent forgery, but not perfect. Daniel had taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, to the tune of $250,000. I made copies of everything, my mind racing. Where had that money gone? Not into our accounts? That much was clear. That afternoon, I met with Robert the PI again. "I need you to look into something specific," I told him, sliding over the copies of the loan documents. "I think Daniel is hiding money, possibly planning something." Robert studied the papers, his expression grim. "This is fraud, Mrs. Wilson. Forgery. It's a criminal offense." "I know. I need to know where the money went and what else he might be hiding." Over the next week, Robert earned every penny of his fee. He discovered that Daniel had opened a private account in the Cayman Islands. He'd been siphoning money from our joint accounts, from the fraudulent loan, and, most shockingly, from his company. "He's been embezzling," Robert explained, showing me the paper trail he'd uncovered. Small amounts that wouldn't trigger alarms, but consistently, for at least 3 years. "My contact at the firm says they've started an internal audit. Someone tipped them off." "Someone besides me," I noted, wondering who else had noticed Daniel's theft. "It gets worse," Robert continued. "He's been researching countries without extradition treaties, purchasing travel guides for South America, and he's made several calls to a yacht broker in Miami." The picture became painfully clear. Daniel wasn't just having a fling with a younger woman. He was planning to leave, not just me, but the country, before his embezzlement was discovered. And he was preparing to take my money with him. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mrs. Wilson, you need to act quickly. Once he realizes he's being investigated, he'll accelerate his plans." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. I know exactly what I need to do. That night, when Daniel came home, late as usual, I greeted him with a smile and a glass of his favorite scotch. "What's the occasion?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Just appreciating my husband," I replied, raising my own glass in a toast. "To us." He looked momentarily uncomfortable, then clinked his glass against mine. "To us." I watched him over the rim of my glass. This man I'd once loved more than anything. Now I saw him for what he was: selfish, deceitful, a thief in every sense of the word. He'd stolen my trust, my money, and years of my life. But he hadn't taken my intelligence or my will to fight back. While he'd been planning his escape with Sophia, I'd been formulating a plan of my own. The next morning, after Daniel left for work, I made an appointment with the best divorce attorney in the city. Then, I called our bank and our investment firm, locking Daniel out of our accounts. I contacted a forensic accountant recommended by Robert and gave him access to all our financial records. I was done being the naive, trusting wife. From now on, I was in control. As I sat in our kitchen, making lists and calls, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I smiled to myself, imagining him with Sophia, planning their future together, completely, unaware that I was dismantling that future piece by piece. "No problem," I texted back. "Take your time." And I meant it. Daniel could take all the time he wanted with his mistress. Every minute he spent with her was another minute I had to ensure that when he finally made his move, he'd discover that I'd already won the game. That weekend, I made my boldest move yet. Through a mutual acquaintance, I arranged to accidentally bump into Sophia at her favorite coffee shop. She recognized me immediately, her eyes widening in panic before she composed herself. "You're Daniel's wife," she said, her voice steady but her hands betraying her nervousness as she clutched her coffee cup. "Emma," I supplied, extending my hand with a sad smile. "And you're Sophia." She hesitated before shaking my hand, confusion evident on her beautiful face. She'd expected anger, accusations, a scene, not this calm, almost friendly approach. "I think we should talk," I said, gesturing to an empty table in the corner. "I promise I'm not here to make a scene." Curiosity won out over caution, and she followed me to the table. For the next hour, I played the role of a heartbroken but dignified wife, seeking answers rather than revenge. "How long?" I asked, my voice carefully modulated to sound hurt but not hostile. 8 months, she admitted, having the grace to look somewhat ashamed. I didn't know he was married at first. By the time I found out, I was already in love with him. I nodded understandingly, as if her love justified destroying my marriage. "And he's told you he's leaving me?" She straightened, confidence returning. "Yes, soon. He's just waiting for the right time." "And what does that mean exactly?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "He's just finalizing some financial matters, making sure he doesn't lose everything in the divorce. Then we're going. Away together." "Away?" I prompted, sipping my latte. "He has a plan," she said, pride evident in her voice. "A fresh start for both of us. Somewhere tropical." I nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds wonderful. And the money from his company?" "He's told. You about that?" Her slight flinch told me she knew about the embezzlement. That's just... He deserves that money. They've underpaid him for years. "Of course," I agreed, reaching into my purse. I pulled out my phone and discreetly pressed record. "And what about the new identities? Has he arranged those yet?" Sophia's eyes widened fractionally before she caught herself. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? Daniel hasn't mentioned the passports? The yacht? The plan to leave the country before the company discovers the missing funds?" She stared at me, calculation replacing confusion in her eyes. "You know more than you should." I smiled sadly. "I know everything, Sophia. The question is, what do you know? Because I'm not sure Daniel has been entirely honest with you either." For the next half hour, I carefully extracted information from her, playing on her ego, her insecurity, her need to prove that she was more important to Daniel than I was. By the time we parted, I had a recording of her admitting she knew about Daniel's plan to flee with embezzled money, and more details about their escape plan than Daniel had probably wanted her to share. As we stood to leave, she suddenly grabbed my wrist, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "He doesn't love you anymore," she hissed, her composure finally cracking. "He hasn't for a long time. You're just too pathetic to see it." I gently removed her hand, meeting her gaze steadily. "Maybe, but at least I'm not stupid enough to believe a man who betrays his wife won't eventually betray his mistress too." I walked away, leaving her staring after me, doubt flickering across her perfect features. That night, while Daniel was supposedly working late, but actually at Sophia's apartment, according to the tracking app on his phone, I sat in our home office, surrounded by documents, bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, the evidence of Daniel's fraud collected by Robert and my legal team. Tomorrow, I would begin executing the most critical phase of my plan. I would move our remaining assets beyond Daniel's reach. I would submit evidence of his forgery to the authorities. I would ensure that when he made his final move, he would find himself checkmated. As I organized the papers into folders, I found myself touching my wedding ring, the simple platinum band Daniel had placed on my finger a decade ago, promising to love and cherish me forever. With deliberate movements, I removed it and placed it in the center of his desk, where he couldn't miss it. It was time to stop being the woman Daniel had betrayed and become the woman who would bring him to justice. After discovering my husband's betrayal and financial crimes, I found myself operating with a clarity I'd never experienced before. Where once I'd been confused and desperate for Daniel's approval, now I was focused and determined. My mission was simple: regain control of what was rightfully mine before Daniel could steal it all. I'd spent the previous day placing my wedding ring on his desk, a silent declaration of war he hadn't yet discovered. Now it was time to secure what remained of our assets before he could drain them completely. The bank opened at 9 a.m. I was waiting outside at 8:45, dressed in a crisp navy suit that projected competence and authority. When the doors unlocked, I was the first customer inside, requesting a meeting with the branch manager. "Mrs. Wilson," Alan Foster greeted me with a warm handshake. We'd known each other for years. He'd helped Daniel and me open our first joint account. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to make some changes to our accounts," I explained, sliding over the paperwork my lawyer had prepared. "Effective immediately." Alan's eyebrows rose as he reviewed the documents. "These are significant changes. Removing Mr. Wilson from all accounts, changing passwords and access codes. May I ask why?" I leaned forward slightly. "Alan, you've been our banker for years. Have you noticed the large withdrawals from our accounts recently?" His professional mask slipped for just a moment. "I'm not at liberty to discuss." "I understand," I interrupted gently. "But I think you know something isn't right. I've recently discovered my husband has been moving our money without my knowledge or consent. I'm simply protecting what's left." Alan studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll need to see your ID and have you sign several forms." He didn't ask any more questions, and I was grateful for his discretion. By 10 a.m., Daniel no longer had access to our checking account, savings account, or the safe deposit box. I'd changed all the online banking passwords and set up alerts for any attempted access. My next stop was Brewster and Hall, the investment firm that managed our portfolio. "Mrs. Wilson," Margaret Brewster herself greeted me, her handshake firm. "This is unexpected." "I apologize for coming without an appointment," I said as I took a seat in her plush office. "But this couldn't wait." Over the next hour, I explained that I needed to separate our investment accounts and secure my portion of our portfolio. I didn't mention Daniel's affair or his embezzlement. I didn't need to. Margaret was sharp enough to read between the lines. "You understand that some of these investments have penalties for early withdrawal," she cautioned as she processed my requests. "I understand," I replied. "But I'm not withdrawing everything. Just transferring ownership into my name alone and securing certain assets." By noon, I'd secured control of approximately 70% of our investment portfolio. It wasn't everything, but it was more than enough to ensure Daniel couldn't liquidate our investments for his escape plan. My final stop was the office of Helen Graham, a real estate attorney recommended by Robert Taylor. Within 2 hours, she had drawn up the paperwork to transfer our vacation property in the Hamptons solely into my name. Daniel signed power of attorney to me last year when he thought he might be traveling extensively for work, I explained, sliding the document across her desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very document he'd created to make business easier while he traveled was now being used against him. "This all appears to be in order," Helen confirmed after reviewing the power of attorney. "The property transfer should be complete within 48 hours. By late afternoon, I was exhausted but satisfied. I'd secured as much of our shared assets as legally possible. Daniel would soon discover that his financial escape route was rapidly disappearing. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "I need to talk to you again. Alone." I smiled grimly as I pulled over to respond. Le Rouge Café, 7 p.m. This time I arrived early, choosing a quiet corner booth where we wouldn't be overheard. I ordered a glass of wine and waited, mentally rehearsing my approach. When Sophia arrived, she looked agitated, her usual poise replaced by nervous energy. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she slid into the booth across from me. "Of course," I replied calmly. "What's on your mind?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "After we spoke, I did some digging. You were right. Daniel hasn't been completely honest with me." "Oh?" I kept my expression neutral, despite the surge of satisfaction. "The money," she said, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the table. "He told me he had over $2 million set aside for us. But when I asked him about it yesterday, he got defensive, said things were complicated and that I needed to trust him." I nodded sympathetically. "Daniel has always been secretive about money." "It's more than that," she insisted. "Last night, I checked his phone while he was in the shower. He's been talking to another woman." Her voice cracked slightly, the irony of her distress apparently lost on her. I allowed myself a small, sad smile. That must have been painful to discover. Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. "I've put everything into this relationship. My reputation at work, my future plans. He promised me we'd start fresh somewhere beautiful. Now I'm not even sure he plans to take me with him." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "He's planning to leave the country soon. He told me it was about a business opportunity, but now I think—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "You think he might be planning to leave without you?" I finished for her. Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy. Sophia was certainly guilty of sleeping with a married man, but she was also Daniel's victim in her own way, manipulated by the same person who had betrayed me. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, wiping away a tear. This was the opening I needed. "Perhaps we could help each other," I suggested carefully. Her eyes narrowed. "How?" "Daniel has been lying to both of us. He's taken money that doesn't belong to him, not just from me, but from his company. He's planning to disappear with that money before anyone realizes what he's done." I paused, letting that sink in. "If you're worried he might leave without you, you're probably right. What are you suggesting?" Sophia asked, her voice steadier now. "Information," I said simply. "I need to know exactly what Daniel has told you about his plans. Dates, locations, accounts. In exchange, I can help ensure you're not implicated when everything falls apart." "Implicated?" Her face paled. "I haven't done anything illegal." "You knew about money he stole," I reminded her gently. "You admitted as much when we last spoke. That could make you an accessory." Fear flashed across her features. "I didn't know it was stolen. I thought—" "It doesn't matter what you thought," I interrupted. "What matters is what you can prove, and right now our conversation is the only record of your knowledge." Sophia stared at me, calculation replacing fear in her eyes. "You recorded me." I didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, I took a small sip of my wine and waited. After a long moment, she seemed to reach a decision. "What do you want to know?" For the next hour, Sophia told me everything. Daniel's plan to transfer the remaining funds to an offshore account next week. The yacht he'd, arranged to purchase in Miami, under a false name. The tickets he'd purchased to Belize, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. Most importantly, she told me about a meeting Daniel had scheduled with a business associate who was actually helping him secure false identification documents. "When is this meeting?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Thursday night, at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel." She hesitated, then added, "He told me he was having dinner with his mother that night." I smiled thinly. "Daniel's mother has been dead? For 5 years." Sophia looked genuinely shocked. "He talks about her all the time, says they speak weekly." "Another lie," I confirmed. "He's very good at those." As our conversation wound down, I could see Sophia processing everything, not just what I'd told her, but the reality of who Daniel truly was. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "What I need to," I replied simply. "And I suggest you distance yourself from Daniel as quickly and quietly as possible." She nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't know everything." "Few people do, when it comes to Daniel," I said, standing to leave. "That's how he's survived this long." The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Thomas Bennett, and shared everything I'd learned from Sophia. "This is excellent," Thomas said, reviewing my notes. "With this information, we can file for an emergency hearing to freeze any remaining joint assets, and the evidence of forgery and embezzlement is more than enough for criminal charges." "How soon can we move?" I asked. "I can file the paperwork today. But, Emma," he added, his expression serious, "once this starts, there's no going back. Daniel will know you're behind it." "Good," I said firmly. "It's time he learned who he's really dealing with." By that afternoon, Thomas had filed for an emergency freeze on all remaining joint assets. He'd also submitted evidence of Daniel's forgery and financial crimes to the district attorney's office. Meanwhile, I was laying the groundwork for my final move. I called Daniel that evening, keeping my voice light and casual. "I was thinking," I said after some small talk, "we should get away this weekend, just the two of us. It's been too long since we had quality time together." Daniel hesitated. "This weekend? I'm not sure I can get away from work." "The Anderson deal." "Please, Daniel," I interrupted, allowing a note of vulnerability to enter my voice. "I miss you. We've been so distant lately. I'm worried about us." The silence on the other end told me he was calculating his response. "Let me see what I can do," he finally said. "Thank you," I breathed, as if his tentative agreement was a lifeline I'd been desperately seeking. "I was thinking we could go to the cabin in the Catskills. It's peaceful there." "The cabin," he repeated, surprise evident in his voice. We didn't own a cabin. It was the same non-existent retreat Mark had mentioned at the dinner party. "Yes, you know," I said innocently. "The one you go to sometimes? For stress relief?" Another long pause. "Right. The cabin. Let me check my schedule and get back to you." After we hung up, I smiled to myself. Daniel was now aware that I knew something, but not how much. He would be off balance, unsure of what I'd discovered and what I might do next. It was exactly where I wanted him, reactive rather than proactive. The next day, I received an alert from our credit card company. Daniel had tried to make a large purchase, only to discover the card was declined. Minutes later, my phone rang. "Emma." Daniel's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "There seems to be an issue with our credit cards and the bank accounts." "Oh?" I feigned confusion. "What kind of issue?" "They're saying I don't have authorization, that my name has been removed." "How strange," I said mildly. "I'll look into it." "Emma," he said, his tone shifting to something more dangerous. "What have you done?" "Nothing you haven't forced me to." "Do," I replied, dropping the pretense. "We should talk, Daniel. Tonight." "I have a meeting." "Cancel it," I interrupted coldly. "Unless you'd prefer I contact the police with what I know about your financial activities." "Silence, then." "I'll be home by 7. He didn't show up." Instead, At 6:45, I received a text from Sophia. He knows. He's furious. Be careful. I wasn't surprised or concerned. I'd expected Daniel to panic once he realized I was aware of his schemes. That panic would push him to make mistakes, and mistakes were exactly what I needed from him now. At 10 p.m., I sent Daniel a simple text. I know about the embezzlement, the forgery, and the plan to leave the country. The police have been notified. Your business partners have been informed. It's over, Daniel. Within minutes, my phone exploded, with calls and texts from him, alternating between pleading, threats, and desperate negotiations. I ignored them all. Instead, I called Robert Taylor. It's time for the final phase, I told him. He'll make his move soon. Are you sure you're safe? Robert asked, concern evident in his voice. Men like Daniel can be dangerous when cornered. I'm sure, I replied confidently. Daniel isn't violent. He's a coward at heart. Right now, he's frantically trying to salvage his escape plan, and tomorrow we'll be ready when he makes his last desperate move. The next morning, Thursday, I laid the final trap. I sent Daniel a text. I'm meeting with the forensic accountant and the DA at 2 p.m. tomorrow to turn over all evidence. If you want to explain your side before I do, I'll be at Brewster and Hall at noon. It was a lie. I had no such meeting scheduled. But Daniel wouldn't know that. He would see it as his last chance to either convince me to keep quiet or to access any remaining funds before fleeing. Either way, he would be exactly where I wanted him when everything fell apart. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I transferred the last of my personal belongings to a new apartment I'd rented under my maiden name. I delivered copies of all evidence to my lawyer, with instructions to submit them to the authorities regardless of what happened next. And then, I waited for Daniel to walk into the trap I'd set. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, a beautiful day for justice. I woke early, my mind sharp despite having slept little. Today was the day Daniel's world would crumble, and I wanted to savor every moment. I dressed carefully, a red sheath dress that projected confidence, paired with the diamond earrings Daniel had given me for our 5th anniversary. It seemed fitting to wear them one last time, a reminder of what once was and what he had thrown away. At 9:30, my phone rang. It was Daniel. Emma. He sounded breathless, panicked. I need your help. I'm in the emergency room. My heart skipped a beat despite everything. What happened? Chest pains, he said, his voice weak. They think it might be my heart. I need you here, please. For a moment, I almost believed him. Daniel had always been an excellent actor. But then I remembered the tracking app still installed on his phone. A quick check confirmed he wasn't at any hospital. He was at our house. Which hospital? I asked, playing along. Mount Sinai, he replied without hesitation. East Wing, room 302. I'll be there soon, I promised, then ended the call. I immediately contacted Robert. He's trying to delay me with a fake medical emergency. He's actually at our house. Probably gathering whatever valuables he can find. Robert confirmed. My guy outside says he arrived about 20 minutes ago with 2 large suitcases. Perfect, I said with grim satisfaction. Everything is proceeding as expected. While Daniel ransacked our home for anything of value, I met with Thomas Bennett one last time to review our strategy. We were just finishing when my phone buzzed. With a text from Daniel. Where are you? The doctors need to know about my medications. I ignored it and checked the tracking app again. Daniel had left our house and was now headed toward Midtown, likely to his meeting at Brewster and Hall, where he thought I'd be waiting with access to our remaining investments. He's on the move, I told Thomas. Time to spring the trap. At precisely noon, Daniel strode into the Brewster and Hall lobby, looking harried but determined. I watched from a discreet corner as Margaret Brewster herself approached him. Mr. Wilson, she greeted him. Coolly, we've been expecting you. I'm here to see my wife, he said, glancing around the lobby. Mrs. Wilson isn't here, Margaret replied, but there are some other people who would like to speak with you. Daniel's face paled as two men in suits approached from the conference room. Daniel Wilson? I'm Agent Harris with the FBI, and this is Agent Thompson. We'd like to ask you some questions about certain financial irregularities at your firm. I watched the blood drain from Daniel's face. I don't know what you're talking about. I have an urgent family matter. Sir, Agent Harris interrupted firmly. We have a warrant for your financial records and evidence of embezzlement in excess of $1 million. I suggest you cooperate fully. Daniel's eyes darted around, the lobby landing on me as I stepped out from my corner. Emma, he whispered, betrayal and shock written across his features. I approached slowly, stopping just out of reach. I told you it was over, Daniel. You did this? He asked incredulously. You called the FBI? Actually, your company did, I replied calmly. I simply provided them with evidence that confirmed their suspicions. Evidence you left in our home office. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You don't understand, Agent Thompson smoothly inserted himself between us. Sir, I need you to step back. But Daniel was spiraling now, desperation making him reckless. Emma, you have to listen to me. I can explain everything. The money, Sophia. It's not what you think. Mr. Wilson, Agent Harris interjected, we're also investigating allegations of identity theft and loan fraud. Perhaps you'd like to explain those as well. Daniel's grip on reality seemed to slip further. This is a mistake, a huge misunderstanding. Emma, tell them. I shook my head slowly. The only mistake was mine, Daniel. I trusted you. As the agents led Daniel toward the exit, his phone began ringing. He tried to answer it, but Agent Thompson took the phone and checked the screen. Sophia Reynolds, he read aloud, then looked at Daniel with raised eyebrows. I need to take that, Daniel insisted desperately. It's important. I'm sure Ms. Reynolds can wait, Agent Harris replied dryly. I followed them to the lobby entrance, maintaining a careful distance. As they reached the doors, Daniel turned back to me, his expression a mix of rage and disbelief. You've ruined everything, he hissed. Years of planning, all gone because you couldn't mind your own business. I smiled coldly. That's where you're wrong, Daniel. Our marriage, our finances, our future, they were my business. You just forgot that. As the agents escorted him outside to a waiting car, I felt a presence beside me. It was Robert, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. You did it? He said, nodding approvingly. Textbook execution? Not quite, I replied, checking my watch. We still have one loose end. Right on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Daniel isn't answering. Is everything okay? I showed Robert the message. She still doesn't know. What are you going to do? He asked curiously. Watch, I replied, dialing Sophia's number. She answered on the first ring. Emma? What's happening? Daniel was supposed to meet me an hour ago. Daniel has been arrested, Sophia, I said flatly. The FBI took him into custody 20 minutes. Ego. Charges of embezzlement, fraud, and forgery? There was a shocked silence then. That's not possible. We were supposed to leave today. He promised a lot of things, I interrupted. To both of us. But Daniel won't be going anywhere except prison for a very long time. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. What about the money? Our plans? The money is gone, I explained calmly. Returned to his company or frozen by the courts. As for your plans, I paused deliberately. Daniel made other arrangements. What does that mean? It means he bought only one ticket to Belize, Sophia. Not two. He was planning to leave without you. Another long silence, then a sound that might have been a sob. You're lying. Check your messages, I suggested. I sent you a copy of his itinerary. 1 passenger, 1 way. I had indeed forwarded her the travel confirmation Robert had uncovered, proof that Daniel's escape plan had never included Sophia. I have to go, she said suddenly, her voice tight with emotion. One more thing, I added before she could hang up. The FBI has the recording of you admitting knowledge of Daniel's crimes. They'll probably want to speak with you very soon, she gasped. You wouldn't. I already did, I lied smoothly. Good luck, Sophia. After ending the call, I turned to Robert with a slight smile. Now it's finished. Remind me never to cross you, he said with a wry grin. I'm not vindictive, I clarified. Just thorough. That evening, as news of Daniel's arrest spread through our social circle, my phone exploded with calls and texts, friends expressing shock and sympathy, offering support and comfort. I ignored most of them, choosing instead to celebrate quietly in my new apartment with a glass of expensive champagne I'd taken from our wine cellar. As I sipped the crisp golden liquid, I reflected on the past 2 weeks. In 14 days, I'd discovered my husband's infidelity, uncovered his financial crimes, secured my assets, and orchestrated his downfall. It was impressive, even to me. My quiet celebration was interrupted by a call from Thomas Bennett. Emma, he greeted me, his voice triumphant. I thought you'd want to know. Daniel was denied bail. The judge cited him as a flight risk due to the evidence of his planned departure. Good, I said simply. There's more, Thomas continued. His business partners are filing additional civil suits, and the forensic accountants have only scratched the surface of the embezzlement. Initial estimates are now closer to $2 million. I whistled, softly. He was busy. Very. Oh, and one more thing. Sophia Reynolds was brought in for questioning this afternoon. Apparently, she tried to access Daniel's office and remove some files. I smiled to myself. How unfortunate for her. After ending the call, I walked to the large windows of my new apartment, gazing out at the city lights. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt truly free. No more doubting myself. No more pretending not to see Daniel's betrayals. No more being the perfect, supportive wife while he built a life with someone else. My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. They're letting me make one call. Please, Emma. I need your help. I can explain everything. They're saying 15-20 years. I can't survive that. Please, Daniel. Of course they'd taken his phone, but he'd found another way to reach me. I read the message twice, imagining him in a holding cell, desperate and afraid. For a moment, I remembered the man I'd fallen in love with, his smile, his ambition, his promises of a beautiful life together. Then I remembered the lipstick on his collar, the forged loan documents, the secret bank accounts, the single ticket to Belize. I deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. The next morning, I woke to headlines in the financial news. Senior partner at Wilson & Reed arrested for massive fraud scheme. Daniel's corporate headshot stared back at me from my tablet screen, his confident smile now seeming smug and sinister. The article detailed the charges against him: embezzlement, wire fraud, identity theft, forgery. It mentioned that the investigation had begun after an anonymous tip from within the company, but noted that Daniel's wife had provided key evidence that accelerated his arrest. I was drinking my morning coffee when the doorbell rang. Checking. The security camera. I saw Sophia standing in the hallway, looking disheveled and frantic. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. What do you want, Sophia? Her eyes were red-rimmed, her perfect makeup smudged. They questioned me for hours, she said accusingly. They think I was part of it. Weren't you? I asked coldly. I didn't know about the embezzlement, she insisted. Not really. Daniel said it was complicated accounting, not theft. I leaned against the doorframe, unmoved. And you believed that. You believed him too, she shot back. For years. She had a point, but I wasn't about to concede it. What do you want from me, Sophia? Help, she said simply. Tell them I wasn't involved, that I was just... She trailed off, unable to find the right word. The mistress? I supplied. The other woman? The reason my marriage fell apart? She flinched. I loved him. So did I replied quietly. And look where that got us both. Sophia's composure cracked entirely. Please, Emma, I could lose everything. My job, my reputation. They're saying I could face charges as an accessory. I studied her for a long moment. The woman who had slept with my husband, worn the jewelry, he bought with my money, planned a future with him at my expense. I should have felt satisfaction at her distress, but instead, I felt something unexpected. Pity. I'll tell them what I know, I said finally. That you were another one of Daniel's victims, manipulated and misled, just like I was. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. I didn't expect... Don't thank me, I interrupted. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because it's the truth. After she left, I contacted Agent Harris and provided a statement confirming that, to my knowledge, Sophia had been unaware of the full extent of Daniel's crimes. It wasn't complete absolution, but it would help. Later that afternoon, I met with Thomas to sign the final divorce papers. Given Daniel's current circumstances, the process was remarkably straightforward. He's not contesting anything, Thomas explained as I signed page after page. His lawyers are advising him to cooperate fully in hopes of a reduced sentence. Smart of them, I remarked. Not that it will help much. No, Thomas agreed. The evidence is overwhelming, and with his assets frozen and the company pursuing civil damages, he'll have nothing left when he eventually gets out. I signed the last page with a flourish, officially ending my marriage to Daniel Wilson. That was his own doing, I said, capping my pen. He left me with nothing, so I left him with nothing. As I walked out of Thomas's office, legally single again, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Daniel had betrayed me in every possible way, but in doing so, he had inadvertently freed me from a marriage that had become a beautiful lie. My phone buzzed with a notification. Daniel's preliminary hearing was scheduled for Monday. I would be there, watching from the gallery as he faced the consequences of his actions. But for now, I had a weekend of freedom ahead of me. And for the first time in years, I answered only to myself. The morning of Daniel's preliminary hearing arrived with unexpected fanfare. What I'd assumed would be a routine legal proceeding had transformed into a local media spectacle. As I approached the courthouse, I was startled to see news vans parked outside, reporters clutching microphones and scanning the crowd for familiar faces. There she is, someone murmured, and suddenly cameras swiveled in my direction. I kept my head high, wearing large sunglasses and a simple black dress that projected dignified strength rather than victimhood. My lawyer, Thomas, met me at the steps, smoothly guiding me through the throng of reporters shouting questions. Mrs. Wilson, did you know about your husband's crimes? Emma, how does it feel to be betrayed? Did you suspect your husband was having an affair? Thomas shielded me as we entered the courthouse. I apologize for this circus, he said quietly. Someone leaked Daniel's mugshot to the press last night, and the story went viral. I wasn't entirely surprised. Daniel had been a prominent figure in financial circles, and his dramatic fall from grace was exactly the kind of story people devoured. Wealth, betrayal, crime, and sex all wrapped in one neat package. Inside the courtroom, I took a seat in the back row, determined to observe without being observed. But as Daniel was led in, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit, his eyes immediately found mine. Gone was the confident, charismatic man I'd married. He looked smaller somehow, his face ashen, his usually perfect hair disheveled. For a brief moment, our gazes locked, and I saw a flicker of silent pleading in his eyes. I held his stare, my expression neutral, until he was the one who looked away. The hearing itself was brief and devastating for Daniel. The prosecutor outlined the charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and presented enough evidence that the judge ordered the case to proceed to trial. When the issue of bail arose, Daniel's lawyer argued passionately for his release. "Your Honor, my client has deep ties to the community. His passport has been surrendered. He poses no flight risk." The prosecutor's response was swift and damning. The defendant had purchased a one-way ticket to Belize, scheduled for the day after his arrest. He had transferred significant funds to offshore accounts and had made arrangements to purchase a yacht under a false identity. "He is the definition of a flight risk," the judge agreed, denying bail. As Daniel was led away, he turned once more in my direction, his expression now one of pure hatred. I met his gaze steadily until the door closed behind him. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had intensified. Thomas tried to guide me through without comment, but I paused at the bottom of the steps. "Mrs. Wilson, can we get a statement?" A reporter called out. Against Thomas's whispered advice, I removed my sunglasses and addressed the cameras. "I was as shocked as anyone to discover my husband's crimes," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I've cooperated fully with authorities, and am focusing now on rebuilding my life. That's all I have to say. Thank you." It was brief and dignified, revealing nothing while appearing transparent. As Thomas hurried me to a waiting car, he sighed. "That will be everywhere by noon." "Good," I replied simply. By evening, Daniel's mugshot had indeed gone viral, his disheveled appearance a stark contrast to the polished corporate headshots people were accustomed to seeing. Financial news channels ran special segments on the Wilson embezzlement scandal, complete with graphics showing the money trail and interviews with shocked colleagues. Meanwhile, I was executing the next phase of my plan. With Thomas's help, I had already frozen all our remaining joint assets. Now I began the process of legally separating our finances completely. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emma." It was Daniel, his voice tense. "They're giving me phone privileges while I wait for trial." "What do you want, Daniel?" I kept my tone cool, emotionless. "I need access to some money. For legal fees, they've frozen everything." I laughed softly. "That's unfortunate." "Emma, please," he hissed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Morgan is a good lawyer, but he's expensive. Without him, I'm looking at 20 years. You should have thought about that before you stole $2 million and planned to abandon me." His voice hardened. "I never would have actually left you with nothing. It was just insurance." "Insurance?" I repeated incredulously. "You forged my signature on loan documents. You systematically drained our accounts. You bought a one-way ticket to another country. Don't insult my intelligence by claiming it was insurance." "Fine," he snapped. "Think what you want, but I'm still your husband. After everything we've been through—" "Not for long," I interrupted. "The divorce will be final in 60 days, and given your current circumstances, the courts are expediting the process." Silence stretched between us, then, "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me suffer." "I'm not enjoying any of this, Daniel," I replied truthfully. "But I'm not going to rescue you from consequences of your own making. Not anymore." Before he could respond, I ended the call and blocked the number. That afternoon, I had a meeting with Sophia Reynolds. She'd requested it, and despite my reservations, I'd agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe far from both our usual haunts. She was already there when I arrived, nervously shredding a napkin. Without her usual perfect makeup and designer clothes, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down, "and for speaking to the FBI on my behalf. They've dropped the accessory investigation." I nodded, studying her across the table. "You're welcome. Despite everything, I don't believe you deserved prison time." She flinched slightly at the "despite everything," but pressed on. "I've been fired from the firm. No one will hire me now, not with my name connected to the scandal." "That's unfortunate," I said, echoing my response to Daniel. Unlike with him, however, I felt a twinge of genuine sympathy for Sophia. She had made terrible choices, but Daniel had manipulated her just as he had me. "The thing is," she continued hesitantly, "I know I have no right to ask, but I'm desperate. I can't make rent next month, and my savings are almost gone." I sighed. "Sophia, I'm not going to give you money." "I understand," she said quickly. "I wouldn't either in your position, but I thought maybe, you know people, you could help me find some kind of work." I studied her for a long moment. "Why would I do that?" She met my gaze directly for the first time. "Because you're a better person than both of us. Than me and Daniel. I see that now." Her words caught me off guard. After a pause, I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card. "Martha Daniels. She runs a small marketing consultancy in Brooklyn. I went to college with her. Tell her I sent you, and she'll give you a chance." "One chance," I emphasized. "Don't waste it." Sophia stared at the card as if it were solid gold. "I won't. Thank you." As she tucked the card carefully into her wallet, I added, "For what it's worth, Daniel was planning to leave you behind. He would have discarded you eventually, just as he tried to discard me." She nodded slowly. "I know that now. I was so stupid." "Not stupid," I corrected her. "Just blinded by what you thought was love. It happens to the best of us." After she left, I sat for a while, finishing my coffee and reflecting on the strange turn my life had taken. In the span of a month, I'd gone from being a trusting wife to orchestrating my husband's downfall and offering help to his mistress. The woman I'd been before wouldn't recognize me now, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The following week brought news that Daniel's family had publicly distanced themselves from him. His father, a respected retired judge, issued a statement, expressing profound disappointment in his son's actions and declaring that Daniel would receive no financial support from the family. His sister Rebecca, the one who'd supposedly been getting the diamond bracelet, gave an interview to a local paper stating she hadn't spoken to her brother in months and was shocked and disgusted by his behavior. The final blow came when Daniel's best friend since college, James Fuller, appeared on a financial news program discussing red flags we all missed in Daniel's behavior. James, now positioned as the moral conscience who always had suspicions, conveniently forgot the countless times he'd praised Daniel's business acumen and ethics. One by one, everyone in Daniel's life was abandoning him, protecting their own reputations by proclaiming ignorance or suspicion of his activities. It was a brutal lesson in the fleeting nature of the social connections Daniel had once prized so highly. Meanwhile, I was moving forward with my own life. The beautiful colonial house Daniel and I had shared was now on the market. Thomas had advised that selling quickly, even at a slight loss, would be best for the divorce proceedings. "The court will divide the proceeds equitably," he explained. "But given Daniel's financial crimes, most of his share will likely go toward restitution." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief as I signed the listing agreement. The house had once represented everything I thought we were building together: stability, success, family. Now it felt tainted by lies. 2 days after listing it, I received a call from my real estate agent, Brenda. "Emma, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice excited. "We have an offer, full asking price, cash, with a flexible closing date." I was stunned. "Already? We just listed it." "I know," It's from the Carmichael Foundation. They want to convert it into a transitional home for women leaving abusive relationships. They love the space and location. I felt a sudden warmth spread through me. The idea of our former home, the scene of so much deception, being transformed into a place of healing and new beginnings felt deeply right. Tell them yes, I said immediately. And let them know I'd like to make a matching donation to help with the conversion costs. The sale closed within 2 weeks. As promised, I donated a significant portion of my proceeds to the Carmichael Foundation. Daniel, when informed of the sale by his lawyer, was furious. "That house was worth at least $100,000 more than you sold it for," he yelled during his next phone call, which I'd accepted only because the number wasn't blocked. "The price was fair," I replied calmly, "and the purpose is worthy." Purpose? It's a house, not a charity case. I sighed. You know, Daniel, that's always been the difference between us. You see assets. I see possibilities. The final blow to Daniel's crumbling world came in the form of divorce papers, delivered to him in jail by Thomas personally. The terms were straightforward. Complete separation of assets, with Daniel's share of our joint property being directed toward restitution for his crimes. I expected him to fight, to drag out the proceedings as a way of maintaining some control over me. To my surprise, he signed immediately. He didn't even read them, Thomas told me, somewhat bewildered. Just signed and handed them back without a word. Perhaps Daniel had finally accepted the inevitability of his situation, or perhaps he was simply too broken to fight anymore. Either way, our marriage was officially over. That evening, as I packed the last of my personal belongings from the house before the new owners took possession, I found a stack of letters in the back of Daniel's desk drawer. They were addressed to me in his handwriting, but had never been sent. I hesitated, then opened the first one, dated 3 years earlier. "Emma," it began, "I've done something I'm not proud of. I've made a terrible mistake. I don't know how to tell you in person, so I'm writing it down." The letter went on to confess to a brief affair with a colleague, filled with remorse and promises to never stray again. The affair wasn't with Sophia. It was with someone named Megan, a name I didn't recognize. I opened another, dated 2 years ago. Another confession, another woman, then another, and another. The pattern became sickeningly clear. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me with Sophia. There had been others, many others, throughout our marriage. Each time he'd written these letters, of confession, perhaps intending to come clean, but had never had the courage to give them to me. I gathered the letters and tossed them into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed the paper, turning his confessions to ash. In a strange way, the letters were a gift. Confirmation that leaving Daniel was not just the right choice, but the only choice. As I drove away from the house for the final time, I felt a profound sense of closure. The life I'd built with Daniel was over, reduced to memories and lessons learned. Ahead of me stretched a future entirely of my own making. 6 months after Daniel's arrest, I sat in the sunlit office of my new business, Second Chances Financial Consulting. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. I'd been given a second chance at life, and now I was helping other women secure their financial futures. The office was small but elegant, with large windows overlooking a tree-lined street in Brooklyn. I'd used part of my divorce settlement to lease the space and hire a small staff, 3 other financial advisors, all women, and a receptionist. Our specialty was working with women going through major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, career changes, and helping them establish financial independence. In just 6 months, we'd built a dedicated clientele, mostly through word of mouth. I was reviewing a client file when my assistant, Natalie, knocked on my door. "Emma, your 2 o'clock is here, and this came for you." She handed me a thick manila envelope. It was from Thomas Bennett's office. Inside was the final judgment in Daniel's criminal case. I'd chosen not to attend the trial, having said all I needed to say in my deposition. Now, scanning the document, I saw that Daniel had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 8. In addition, he was ordered to pay $2.4 million in restitution to his former company and various financial institutions. I closed the file and tucked it into my desk drawer. Daniel's fate no longer defined my days, and I had a client waiting. My 2 o'clock was a woman named Laura, recently separated from her husband of 20 years and terrified about her financial future. "I've never managed money before," she confessed, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "Stephen always handled everything. I don't even know what we have." I smiled reassuringly. "That's why you're here, Laura. And trust me, you're not alone. Many women find themselves in exactly your position." By the end of our session, Laura had a clear understanding of her assets, a preliminary budget, and a plan to secure copies of all important financial documents before moving forward with her divorce. The relief on her face as she left was a reminder of why I'd started this business. That evening, I met Jessica for dinner at our favorite restaurant. She'd been my rock throughout the past year, and our weekly dinners had become a cherished tradition. "So," she said as we clinked glasses, "I saw Daniel made the news again. 12 years. I nodded. "Could have been worse. Could have been better." "How do you feel about it?" I considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I don't feel much of anything anymore. At first, I wanted justice. Maybe even revenge. Now I just want to move forward." Jessica studied me over her wine glass. "You have moved forward, Em. Look, at you. New business, new apartment, new life. You're thriving." "I am," I agreed, surprising myself with how true it felt. Who would have thought Daniel's betrayal would end up being the best thing that ever happened to me? When I returned home that night, there was a package waiting outside my apartment door. No return address, just my name printed in neat block letters. Inside was a manuscript titled "Reclaiming Your Life, a Financial Survival Guide for Women in Crisis." A note was attached from a senior editor at Baldwin Publishing. "Ms. Wilson, I've been following your story and your work with women in financial transitions. We believe your experiences and expertise would make an invaluable book. If you're interested in sharing your journey, please call me." I carried the package inside, turning the idea over in my mind. Writing a book had never been among my ambitions, but the thought of helping women beyond my immediate client base was appealing. Perhaps Daniel's betrayal could become something even more meaningful, a way to empower other women to protect themselves financially. The next morning, I called the editor and agreed to consider the project. Over the following months, between client meetings and growing my business, I began writing. The book became a way to process everything that had happened, transforming my pain into purpose. I wrote about the warning signs I'd missed, the financial protections I wished I'd put in place, and the steps I'd taken to rebuild my life after betrayal. 3 months into the writing process, I received an unexpected visitor at my office, Sophia Reynolds. She looked different, more polished and professional than when I'd last seen her, but with a new maturity in her expression. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said tentatively. "Martha Daniels told me about your firm." "Come in," I said, curious rather than angry. "How are you doing?" "Better," she replied, taking a seat across from me. "I've been working for Martha for almost a year now. She's been an incredible mentor." "I'm glad to hear it." Sophia fidgeted slightly. "I wanted to thank you. For the recommendation, obviously, but also for not hating me. You had every right to, but instead you helped me. It changed everything for me." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "Life's too short to hold on to hatred, Sophia. Besides, we were both victims of Daniel's manipulation, just in different ways. She nodded slowly. I've been seeing a therapist, working through why I was attracted to someone like him, why I thought it was okay to be with a married man. It's been enlightening. Good for you, I said sincerely. Anyway, she continued, reaching into her bag. The real reason I came is this. She handed me an envelope. It's information about Daniel that I think you should have. Inside were printed emails between Daniel and a man named Victor Torres, dating from about a year before Daniel's arrest. In them, Daniel discussed moving money through a series of shell companies to hide it from E and the firm. I found these on an old external hard drive Daniel gave me to use, Sophia explained. I don't think he realized these were still on it. I've already given copies to the FBI, but I thought you should know. There might still be money hidden somewhere. Money that should rightfully be yours. I studied the emails carefully. Thank you for this. I'll pass it to my lawyer. After Sophia left, I forwarded the emails to Thomas, who promised to investigate immediately. 2 weeks later, he called with news. Emma, those emails were the missing piece. We've traced another $800,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. Given the evidence, the court has agreed to release those funds to be divided between you and Daniel's restitution requirements. It was the final financial tie binding me to Daniel, and its discovery brought a sense of completion rather than triumph. The money was substantial, but its significance went beyond dollars and cents. It represented the last of Daniel's lies, coming to light. As summer turned to fall, my book neared completion. What had begun as a financial guide had evolved into something more personal and powerful, a roadmap for women to recognize financial manipulation and protect themselves from it. When the manuscript was finally complete, my editor was ecstatic. This is exactly what we hoped for, Emma. Raw, honest, and incredibly practical. We'd like to fast-track publication for early next year. The prospect both terrified and exhilarated me. Sharing my story meant making myself vulnerable, but it also meant potentially helping thousands of women avoid the pitfalls I'd experienced. Let's do it, I agreed. That evening, I celebrated by hosting a small dinner party in my apartment. Jessica, my new colleagues from the firm, and a few other friends who'd supported me through the past year. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I looked around at these people who had become my chosen family and felt a surge of gratitude. To new beginnings, Jessica offered, raising her glass. And to lessons learned, I added. Later, after everyone had gone, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights. In the distance, I could just make out the silhouette of my old neighborhood, where the house Daniel and I had shared now served as a haven for women rebuilding their lives. It seemed an apt metaphor for my own journey, taking something broken and transforming it into something meaningful and strong. The Emma who had discovered Daniel's betrayal 18 months ago had been shattered, but the woman I'd become since then was more complete than I'd ever been before. Daniel had thought he could hide his secret life, that he could discard me when it suited him. Instead, he'd inadvertently set me free, and for that, perhaps I should thank him, if I ever bothered to think about him at all. 3 years passed more quickly than I could have imagined. My business had expanded to 3 locations across New York. My book had become a surprise bestseller, and I'd found a rhythm to my new life that felt both comfortable and exhilarating. Daniel had become a distant memory, someone I rarely thought about except when legal matters required my attention, until the letter arrived. It was a Tuesday morning when I found it mixed in with my regular mail, a plain white envelope with my name and address handwritten in a script I still recognized instantly. The return address was Hawkins Federal Correctional Institution. I stood in my kitchen, holding the envelope, debating whether to open it or simply throw it away. In the end, curiosity won out. Inside was a single sheet of prison stationery, the handwriting neat and controlled. Emma. I know it's been years since we last spoke. I've had a lot of time to think in here, about what I did, who I was, and the person I want to be when I get out. I've been working with a prison counselor trying to understand why I betrayed the one person who truly loved me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to finish reading this letter. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not just for the affair with Sophia, but for all of it. The lies, the stealing, the way I made you doubt yourself. You deserved better. I've been following your success from in here. The book, your business. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be. You've built something meaningful from the ashes of what I destroyed. I'm up for my first parole hearing next month. The chances aren't good, but I'm preparing anyway. If I do get out, I want you to know that I won't contact you again after this letter. You've moved on, and you should. This is just my way of closing the door on the past with something other than anger as my last words to you. Take care of yourself, Emma. Daniel, I read the letter twice, searching for the manipulation, the angle, the hidden agenda. Daniel had never done anything without calculating the benefit to himself. This apparent redemption seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed with his upcoming parole hearing. I placed the letter in my desk drawer and tried to put it out of my mind. I had a busy day ahead, client meetings, a conference call with my publisher about the paperback release of my book, and dinner plans with Andrew, the architect I'd been dating for the past 6 months. But Daniel's words lingered, an unwelcome ghost from the past. That evening, I canceled my dinner with Andrew, claiming a migraine. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Jessica. "He wrote to you?" she asked incredulously after I told her about the letter. "After all this time? Apparently prison has made him reflective," I replied dryly. "Or he thinks a letter from his famous ex-wife might help his parole case," Jessica suggested. "Your book has made you something of a public figure, Em. Your support would look good to the parole board." "He didn't ask for anything," I pointed out. "No request for a letter of support, no plea for help, just an apology." "Which makes it the perfect manipulation," Jessica countered. "He knows you well enough to understand that asking directly would guarantee refusal." She was right, of course. Daniel had always been skilled at indirect manipulation. If he wanted something from me, this understated approach was exactly how he'd go about it. "Are you going to respond?" Jessica asked. I swirled the wine in my glass, considering. "No. Whatever game he's playing, I'm not interested." "Good," she said firmly. "He doesn't deserve another moment of your attention." After we hung up, I took the letter from my desk and prepared to shred it. But something stopped. Me, not sentimentality, but a nagging curiosity. What if the letter wasn't a manipulation? What if 3 years in prison had genuinely changed Daniel? I placed the letter back in my desk. I wouldn't respond, but I wouldn't destroy it either. Not yet. 2 weeks later, my assistant interrupted me during a client meeting. "I'm sorry, Emma, but there's an urgent call from Hawkins Federal Correctional. They say it's about Daniel Wilson." My heart skipped a beat. Had something happened to him? Despite everything, the thought brought no satisfaction. "Excuse me," I said to my client. "I need to take this." The caller was a prison administrator named Dr. Simmons. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm calling because your ex-husband has been involved in an incident. He's in the prison infirmary with serious injuries." "What happened?" I asked, surprised by my own concern. "He was attacked by another inmate. He's stable, but he's asking to see you. Normally we wouldn't reach out to an ex-spouse, but you're listed as his only emergency contact, and he's been quite insistent." I closed my eyes, conflicted. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "I understand," Dr. Simmons said gently. "But I should inform you that his injuries are significant. While not immediately life-threatening, his recovery will be difficult." After a long pause, I found myself saying, "I'll come tomorrow." The decision surprised even me. Why would I drive 4 hours to see a man who had betrayed me so completely? Perhaps it was simple human compassion. Or perhaps, after 3 years of healing, I was finally strong enough to face him without being wounded again. The next morning, I drove to Hawkins, a medium security facility nestled in the rural countryside. After clearing security and surrendering my phone, I was escorted to the infirmary by a solemn guard. "He's in rough shape," the guard warned as we approached. "Broken ribs, fractured jaw, internal bleeding. The other guy had a homemade weapon." Daniel lay in the hospital bed, his face barely recognizable beneath the bruising and swelling. One arm was in a cast, and various monitors beeped steadily beside him. When he saw me, his uninjured eye widened in surprise. "You came," he whispered, his voice raspy and pained. "I came," I confirmed, stopping at the foot of his bed. "The doctor said you were asking for me." Daniel tried to shift position and winced. "I didn't think you would." "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I hadn't planned what to say, hadn't expected to feel anything beyond detached pity. But seeing him like this, diminished and broken, stirred a complex mix of emotions I wasn't prepared for. "What happened?" I finally asked. "The official story is that I slipped in the shower," he replied with a bitter smile that immediately turned to a grimace of pain. "The truth is that some guys don't like financial criminals. We stole from regular people in their eyes." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "I got your letter," I said finally. "Before this." His gaze dropped to his hands. "I meant what I wrote." "Did you?" I studied his battered face, searching for the charismatic liar I'd been married to. Or was it just another manipulation? A well-timed apology before your parole hearing? "Both, maybe," he admitted with surprising honesty. "I am sorry, Emma. And yes, I was hoping that somehow reaching out might help my case. Old habits." He attempted another small smile. "But getting beaten half to death has a way of clarifying your priorities." I moved closer to the bed, still maintaining a safe distance. "And what are your priorities now, Daniel?" "Surviving the next 5 years," he said quietly. "My lawyer says the parole board is unlikely to be sympathetic, given the amount I stole." This aligned with what Thomas had told me, but hearing Daniel acknowledge it was unexpected. The old Daniel would have insisted he could charm his way to freedom. "And after those 5 years?" I asked. He shrugged slightly, then winced again. "I don't know. Start over somewhere. Find a job that will hire an ex-con. Live quietly." He met my gaze directly. "Stay away from you and anyone else I've hurt." I believed him, which was perhaps the most surprising part of our entire conversation. The Daniel I'd known would have been plotting his triumphant comeback, figuring out angles and leverages. This man seemed resigned, humbled. "I'm sorry this happened to you," I said, gesturing to his injuries. "No one deserves this, regardless of their crimes." Daniel's eye filled with tears. "That's you all over, isn't it? Compassionate, even to people who don't deserve it." He took a shaky breath. "I read your book, you know. They have it in the prison library. It's good, Emma. It will help a lot of women." "That's the idea," I replied. We talked for another 20 minutes. Careful, polite conversation between two people who had once known each other intimately and were now cautious strangers. When the guard indicated my time was up, I stood to leave. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said. "It means more than you know," I nodded. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." As I walked out of the prison, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of closure. Daniel was no longer the villain in my ongoing story. He was just a broken man paying for his mistakes, as irrelevant to my future as he was central to my past. 2 months later, I received formal notification that Daniel had been denied parole. His next opportunity for review would be in 18 months. I filed the letter away without any particular emotional response. Life continued. My business thrived, my relationship with Andrew deepened, and my second book, A Guide for Women Starting Their Own Businesses, was nearing completion. Daniel's letter and our brief reunion at the prison faded into memory. Until a year later, when my assistant once again interrupted a meeting. "There's a call from Hawkins Federal. They say it's urgent." This time, the news was definitive. Daniel had died of complications from pneumonia, exacerbated by the internal injuries that had never fully healed after his attack. I sat in stunned silence as the administrator expressed perfunctory condolences. Despite everything, I had never imagined a world where Daniel simply ceased to exist. As his listed emergency contact, there are some decisions to be made, the administrator continued. Regarding arrangements, I found myself agreeing to handle the details, if only because there seemed to be no one else. Daniel's family had disowned him, his friends had abandoned him. In death, as in his final years of life, he was alone. The funeral was small and brief. Just me, a prison chaplain, and surprisingly, Sophia, who had seen the death notice in the paper. We stood in the cold autumn air as Daniel's simple casket was lowered into the ground, marking the final chapter in a life that had once seemed so full of promise. "He wrote to me, too," Sophia said as we walked back to our cars. "Last year, apologizing." I nodded, unsurprised. "Did you respond?" "No," she admitted. "I didn't know what to say, but I wish I had now." We parted with an awkward hug, united briefly by our shared connection to a man who had changed both our lives irrevocably. That evening, alone in my apartment, I pulled out the letter Daniel had sent me, the only tangible reminder I had of our final communication. As I reread his words, I realized that despite everything, I hoped he had found some measure of peace before the end. The next morning, I received one final surprise. A package arrived from Hawkins Federal containing Daniel's personal effects, the few possessions he'd been allowed in prison. Among them was a manuscript, handwritten on hundreds of sheets of prison paper, titled "The Man I Was, A Cautionary Tale." Inside was a note addressed to me. "Emma, if you're reading this, I didn't make it out. Maybe that's justice. This is my story. Told honestly for once. Do with it what you think best. It's the only thing of value I have left to give. Daniel." I spent the weekend reading Daniel's manuscript. It was a confession, a repentance, and a warning all in one. The story of how a bright, ambitious man had allowed greed and entitlement to corrupt him completely. He spared himself nothing, detailing not just his affair with Sophia, but the numerous other infidelities, the gradual escalation of his financial crimes, and the relentless self-justification that had allowed him to betray everyone who trusted him. The final chapters, written during his imprisonment, showed a man grappling with the reality of who he had become and the irreparable damage he had caused. It was painful reading, but also undeniably powerful. After careful consideration, I sent the manuscript to my publisher with a note explaining its provenance. 6 months later, The Man I Was published with an introduction I wrote myself, explaining my complicated connection to its author. The proceeds from the book went to a foundation I established to support financial education for women in crisis, a final, inadvertent contribution from the man who had once tried to leave me with nothing. In an ironic twist of fate, Daniel's story, his true story, became a warning that helped countless others avoid similar paths. The man who had lived by deception had found a kind of redemption in brutal honesty, and with that, I closed the door on Daniel Wilson once and for all. 5 years after Daniel's death, I stood in front of a full auditorium at Columbia Business School, preparing to deliver the commencement address. My journey from betrayed wife to successful entrepreneur and author had made me an unexpected role model, particularly for young women planning their financial futures. As I looked out at the sea of eager graduates, I couldn't help reflecting on the twisting path that had led me to this moment. None of it would have happened if Daniel hadn't betrayed me. His deception had been the catalyst for my transformation, a painful gift I would never have chosen but had nevertheless used to build a life more authentic and fulfilling than I could have imagined. "Your plans will fail," I told the graduates, startling them with my bluntness. "Not all of them, not completely, but life has a way of upending even our most careful preparations. The question isn't whether you'll face setbacks, but who you'll become when you do." After the ceremony, I met Andrew for dinner at our favorite restaurant. After 3 years together, he had become my partner in every sense, supportive of my career, understanding of my complicated past, and patient with my initial hesitation to trust again. "How did it go?" he asked as we settled into our usual table. "Surprisingly well," I replied, smiling. "I think I scared them a little, but hopefully inspired them too." Andrew reached across the table and took my hand. "You inspire everyone who knows you, Emma, including me." His fingers brushed the engagement ring he'd given me 6 months earlier, a simple sapphire that couldn't have been more different from the flashy diamond Daniel had once placed on my finger. We had set a wedding date for the following spring, a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family. "I have news," Andrew said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The Hudson Valley property. We got it." I gasped in delight. We'd been trying to purchase a small weekend retreat, a place to escape the city, and eventually, perhaps, a place to raise a family. The historic farmhouse with its apple orchard had been perfect, but the competition had been fierce. How did we manage that? There were multiple offers above asking price. Andrew's smile widened. "The sellers chose us because of your foundation. Apparently, the wife attended one of your financial independence workshops last year. She said it changed her life, and she wanted to sell to someone who was making a difference." I laughed in disbelief. Talk about full circle. Later that evening, as we walked along the Hudson River, I found myself thinking about the strange symmetry of life. Daniel had once planned to escape to a tropical paradise, with money stolen from others. Now, I was building a weekend home with money earned honestly, in a place chosen for its beauty and peace rather than its ability to hide me from consequences. The following Monday, I had a scheduled appearance on Morning America to discuss the expanded edition of my first book. As I sat in the green room preparing for the interview, the producer approached with a slight frown. "Emma, I should warn. Olivia sometimes likes to go off script with questions. She might bring up your ex-husband." I nodded, unconcerned. "That's fine. It's part of my story." When the interview began, Olivia was warm and engaging, focusing primarily on the practical financial advice in my book. But toward the end, she leaned forward with a more serious expression. "Emma, many of our viewers know your background, how you discovered your husband's affair and financial crimes, and how that experience led to your career helping women. What many don't know is that your ex-husband died in prison several years ago, and you actually published his memoir posthumously. Can you tell us about that decision?" I took a deep breath, aware of the cameras but speaking honestly. It was complicated. Daniel hurt me deeply, but in his final years, he seemed to genuinely reckon with the damage he'd caused. His manuscript was raw and truthful in a way he never was during our marriage. I felt his story could help others understand how seemingly small moral compromises can lead to devastating consequences. "Do you think he found redemption?" Olivia asked. I considered the question carefully. I think he found understanding of himself, of the pain he caused, of the flaws in his character that led him astray. Whether that constitutes redemption isn't for me to judge. "And what about you?" Olivia pressed. Have you forgiven him? I've made peace with what happened, I replied. Forgiveness implies an ongoing relationship, and our relationship ended long before his death. What I've found instead is perspective. Daniel's betrayal nearly destroyed me, but it also forced me to discover strengths I never knew I had. After the interview, my phone lit up with messages from friends and clients, many expressing admiration for my candor. But the message that affected me most came from an unknown number. Watched you this morning. You helped me find the courage to leave my cheating husband. Thank you for showing me there's life after betrayal. That simple text embodied everything I'd hoped to accomplish, using my pain to help others avoid or survive similar experiences. That evening, I met with the board of my foundation, now in its 4th year of operation. We had expanded from simply providing financial education to offering emergency grants, legal assistance, and career counseling for women rebuilding their lives after relationship betrayals. The new program is showing incredible results, reported our executive director, Tanya Williams. 92% of participants report feeling more confident in managing their finances, and 87% have successfully established independent credit within 6 months. I looked around the table at the dedicated professionals who had helped turn my vision into reality. Advocates, financial experts, lawyers, and counselors, all committed to ensuring that no woman would find herself financially vulnerable in the way I once had. I'd like to propose something new, I said when Tanya finished her report. A scholarship program for women returning to school after divorce or widowhood. Education was my safety net when everything else fell apart. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and by the end of the meeting, we had outlined the framework for what would become the Second Chances Scholarship. The following weekend, Andrew and I drove up to see our new property in the Hudson Valley. As we walked through the old farmhouse, discussing renovation plans and imagining future possibilities, I felt a profound sense of contentment. On the drive back to the city, we stopped at a scenic overlook with a view of the river. The late afternoon, sun bathed everything in golden light, creating one of those perfect moments that seem to exist outside of ordinary time. Happy? Andrew asked, his arm around my shoulders. Very, I replied, leaning into his embrace. It's strange. If you had told me 6 years ago that losing everything would lead to gaining so much more, I would never have believed you. You never lost everything, Andrew corrected gently. You lost a husband who didn't deserve you and money that wasn't honestly earned. But you kept your integrity, your resilience, and ultimately your joy. Those are the things that matter. I smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. Daniel had indeed taken much from me, but he had never succeeded in taking everything. And what I had built in the aftermath of his betrayal was more authentic, more meaningful, and more truly mine than anything we had shared. That night, back in my apartment, I came across an old photo album while searching for something else. Inside were pictures from my life with Daniel, our wedding, vacations, dinner parties with friends who had long since drifted away. The smiling woman in those photos seemed like a stranger now, someone I had once been but could barely remember. I closed the album and returned it to the shelf. Those memories no longer held power over me. They were simply pages in a story that had ultimately led me here, to a life rich with purpose, love, and genuine connection. The next morning, I received an email from my publisher about the continued success of both my books and Daniel's memoir. We're seeing something interesting, she wrote. Readers are buying them as a set, the cautionary tale paired with the guide to recovery. Together, they're having an even bigger impact. I smiled. At the irony, even in death, Daniel and I remained connected, not as husband and wife, but as opposing voices in a crucial conversation about trust, betrayal, and resilience. His story served as the warning, mine as the way forward. As I prepared for a day of client meetings, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, confident, purposeful, at peace. The woman who had once defined herself as Daniel Wilson's wife had become Emma Carter, author, entrepreneur, advocate, and soon Andrew Miller's wife. Each identity chosen and embraced on my own terms. Daniel had thought he could hide his secret mistress, his financial crimes, his entire double life. He had planned to discard me and disappear with everything we had built together. Instead, his betrayal had set me free, launching me into a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything we had shared. In trying to leave me with nothing, Daniel had inadvertently given me everything, the pain that forced me to grow, the betrayal that taught me strength, and the loss that showed me how to truly find myself. And for that unintentional gift, I could finally feel something like gratitude. Have you ever watched someone's world collapse, knowing you were the architect of their downfall? As Emma's story shows, sometimes revenge isn't about striking back. It's about standing up. If this journey of betrayal and rebirth resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. New stories of resilience every day.